Hi all. So in today's video, we will be exploring the Chrome DevTools, especially the Sources tab, which is quite useful in helping us to debug any web applications. So here I have created an Angular 15 application. So it is not restricted to Angular or any other framework. The Chrome Developer tool can be used for debugging any web application developed in any JavaScript and using HTML and CSS. So let's get started. So first, let's see how we can open the developer tool. So for that, there are multiple ways. Here we can use the more tools and the developer tool. The shortcut for that is Ctrl Shift I. So once we open the developer tool, there are multiple tabs within this. So we will be concentrating mainly on the sources tab. Within the sources tab, there are different parts and we have this left navigation where we have different tabs within this, and the first tab which we will be focusing will be the page. And within this page section, what we will have is we will have all the source code listed here, like mainly the bundles which are available within this website. So since it is an Angular application, our code will reside mainly in the main.js, and these are all the related Angular files. Here we are running our application in development mode. So since we have enabled the source map, we will be able to actually see the TS file within our developer tools. So for opening any file, you can either click these three dots and click on the open file, or you can use the shortcut that is Ctrl P. Once you click on that, you can search for the file name which you need to open. So here I am going to open the app component.ts. So since we are using the source map, we will be able to see the TS file itself here. So one thing to note is that within the page, we have a section called the top, which represents the current HTML window which we are using. So in case there are multiple iframes or other windows within this page, there will be different levels listed here. So within this, we have all the source code which will be available within the SRC folders. So everything is kept in a single view. So in case you need to split up the view so that you need to have a authored view, that is the way in which you view in your VS Code or any editor, you can try this experimental feature, that is group by authored deployed. So once you click on that, you can see that actually it gets split into two parts. One is the authored part, which will be similar to our TS and HTML files which we have in our application, and the actual deployed files, which are the bundles which get deployed in our application. So here you can see our app component.ts listed here, and we have another option called group by folder. So again, you can see that all the webpack related things are shown here. So once we have opened our file, now we can actually start debugging our application. So this is a very simple application which consists of an input box where you can enter a number, and when you click on the find factorial button, it will calculate the factorial and display the result here. So this is the main function, find factorial. So in order to debug an application, the first thing we need to set is a breakpoint. So for creating the breakpoint, you can just go to this line number which is shown here, and in case you need to put the breakpoint here, you can just click on that. So a breakpoint is set here. Now once we click on the button, the execution will be stopped when the control comes to this particular line number. So once we have reached this place, there are different features which we can use. One is when we hover on any of these variables, you will be actually able to see the value. So here you can see the num which is 0, the result which is currently undefined, and this way you will be able to view the value of these variables. Similarly, there is another option to watch any particular variable. So the same thing which we achieve by hovering, you can achieve by making use of the watch. So here I am going to give the num. So here you can see that the value 0 is getting displayed. So once the control comes to our breakpoint here, there are different ways in which you can resume the execution of this script. So one is resume script execution, that is F8. So what happens is that if you press that, immediately it will continue execution till the next breakpoint. So here, since we have not set any breakpoint, it will exit from the debugger mode. Now suppose we add a second breakpoint here, and you can see that this gets called only when the number is greater than 0. So let's give the number as 4, and when we click the find factorial, you can see that the control comes here. Then when I click resume, it runs till the next breakpoint. So there is one more feature in which you can continue executing this script till a particular line. So that is the continue to here option. So you right click on any particular line number and click on continue to here. So the execution continues till that line and stops. And you can resume it by clicking the resume button or F8. Now, similarly, there are different options here. Let's go through one by one. So again, I am clicking the button and the control came here. Now, this particular option, that is step or the key F9, what it does is it will stop on each and every line of our program. So when I click here, you can see that it comes here. Next it comes here. Then what happens, we have a inner function here. So when I press on the step key, it will go within that function and it will keep on executing till the end of the program. Now similarly, we have the step over function. So what this does is, so when we step through this function, that is the find factorial, it will execute line by line. But you saw that when I click on the step, it actually enters within this child function, that is get factorial. So suppose I do not want to go within that function. So let's remove this debugger. In case the debugger is there, it will go within this. So I am removing the debugger. Now, in case I click on the step over function, that is F10, what happens is that it will just execute that as a single statement and get the result. It will not step into the child function. So similarly, we have the step into, that is, once we have stepped to a particular line which contains an inner function, when we click on the step into, it will actually step into that child function and then it will continue execution. Similarly, we have the step out. So here in this scenario, what happens, there is a loop and it will keep on executing. So in case you want to skip debugging this particular function and come out of this function, you can just click on the step out of current function, which immediately takes the execution out of the current function and into the parent function. Now you can see that the result is set here. Similarly, we have the deactivate breakpoint button. On clicking it, what happens is that whenever we click on the button, the execution will not be stopped by the breakpoint. And similarly, we have the pause on exception. This is mainly helpful in case we have an exception occurring in our application and we don't know the exact line in which the exception is happening. So what you can do is we can click on the pause on exception and make sure that pause on caught exception is enabled, so that even the errors or exceptions which are caught in the application, the execution will pause on even those exceptions. So let's refresh this and see what happens. So since there are no exceptions in our application, it did not stop. So let's add an exception in our application and see what happens. So for trying out the exception, what I have done is, in this particular function, I have added a throw error, which will be called whenever the number is a negative number. So let's go to our application and try to enter a negative number. And when we click on the find factorial, the execution stops here since we have put a breakpoint. But when we try to resume it, you can see that actually it stopped execution on that particular exception where we are throwing the error. So this will be particularly useful in scenarios where we don't know from where the exception is happening, like trying to access a property of an undefined variable or a null variable. Those kind of scenarios we will be able to locate the exact line number within the file where the exception happened. So whenever the execution is paused, there are different data which you can see within these panels. One is the scope. So within the scope, you can see all the different variables which are currently active when the execution is stopped. So here we have the global variables which we can see here. Similarly, we have our app component details and the local variables. So one thing about the scope is that in case I change a value here within this scope, that you can do by just double clicking on the value, the actual execution value will be changed. So let us see that in action. So I am going to remove the pause on exception, and when I click on the find factorial, now you can see that the number is having the value -3. So suppose I double click on the scope where the num value is displayed, and I am going to change it as 5. Then I click enter. Now what happens is that the actual number has changed even though it is not refreshed in the watch. Let us refresh that. Now it is also refreshed. So now when we enable the pause on exception and try to execute, you can see that no error is thrown and the factorial is calculated for the value 5 instead of the actual value -3 which we entered here. So by making use of the scope, you will be actually able to modify the execution values. Similarly, we have the call stack. The call stack is the sequence in which the different functions are executed, and the currently executed function will be listed on top of here, and the parent functions like the child will be listed first and the parents will be listed below them. So let us see this in action. So let's put a breakpoint in the get factorial as well. And now when we execute this, you can see that now the topmost entry in the call stack is get factorial and the parent is the find factorial. So using the call stack, you will be able to know the flow of our application execution. So the call stack panel, it has multiple options. So one option is that when we click on any particular entry within the call stack, you can see that the actual execution will be transferred to that particular point within that function. So here I have clicked on the find factorial and this is the current line in which that execution is happening. So suppose you need to re-execute or start from the beginning of this particular entry. So what we can do is we can right click on this particular frame and you can click the restart frame. So when you click on that, automatically the execution will be started from the beginning of that particular frame. So you can execute again till the point where you want to debug. Similarly, we have the option to copy the stack trace. So in case you copy it, once you paste it, you can see that the entire stack trace will be displayed here. One thing which we would have noticed is that the stack trace we see here and the actual stack trace which we copied, these are totally different. You can see that this stack trace consists of a lot of entries, but this consists of only a very few entries. So what happened is that from Angular 15 onwards, Angular working along with the Google Chrome team, what they have done is they have added an option to ignore certain modules or certain frames. So in case you need to see the entire list of frames within the stack trace, you can check this box. Now you can see that a lot of intermediate call chain is there, which is actually suppressed by the Chrome. So how this is done is that the Chrome provides an option to set a particular variable called the X Google ignore list source map extension. So basically, once this field is set some value, those particular entries will not be displayed during the stack trace. So Angular, what it does is it sets the node modules and webpack as the value within this array, and as a result of that, the code which executes within these files, it will be ignored while showing the frames. And another thing to note is that here actually there are different things which are kept in bold. So these are actually asynchronous operations. So again, the Google team has added a new feature called the console.create task, which actually helps us in stitching together all the async stack within our application. So when you click on this, you can see that these are actually executed by the zone.js. So using the console.create task, they have linked these tasks together from our template till our application code where currently the execution is happening. These features have been introduced in Angular from Angular 14.1 and Angular 15. So is there any way in which we can also add some particular files to the ignore list? So suppose in our example, we want to ignore this particular app component.ts. So what we can do is we can right click on this particular file, and there is an option called add script to ignore list. So once you click on that, a warning message will be shown that this file has been added there in the ignore list. And then in case we have some errors within this file where it is automatically paused on exception, when we click on the button, you can see that nothing happens. But once we remove it from the ignore list, immediately the execution is stopped by the debugger. So another way in which you can do this same operation is that once you are within this file, you have the option to right click on this frame and add script to ignore list. It also does the same function. Similarly, we have another option here within the settings. Once you click here, you have the ignore list, whereby you can add any pattern in which you will be able to specify the file name. Now let's take a look at two different kinds of breakpoints which can be quite useful while debugging. So one breakpoint is the log point. So in order to access these special breakpoints, what you can do is you can right click on a particular line number, and once you do that, there will be different options. So here first let us explore the add log point. So log point basically is equivalent to a console.log. So in case you need to log the value of a particular variable during the runtime, you can add a log point and just give the list of numbers which you need to log here. So within this loop, I am giving the fact and I minus 1. So once we do that, what happens is that let's also open the console partially. I am going to give the number as 7 and clicking on find factorial. You can see that the value of the fact variable as well as the number. So the iteration will be displayed here. So this feature is particularly useful in avoiding console.logs within our application. There is no need to go within our application and change the code by adding the console.log for debugging. You can just add the log point and you will be able to see the values here. Similarly, we have another thing called the conditional breakpoint. So within the conditional breakpoint, what you can do is, suppose you have a big loop and you want to break during a particular scenario, like when the variable is having a particular value, at that time only you need to break so that you can debug that particular scenario. So we can do that by making use of the conditional breakpoint. So in this case, let us just break when the value is 4. So this conditional breakpoint, it can be added either by editing the current breakpoint, or you can right click and add the conditional breakpoint. Again, you can just give the condition. So I have given it as I equal to 4. So now what happens is that when we click on the button, it stops here, and it stops only when that particular condition is satisfied. That is when I became 4. And it will not stop for any other values, which is the normal scenario for a breakpoint. So in case of a normal breakpoint, it will keep on stopping in this line throughout the loop. So there can be scenarios while debugging in which you need to actually try out some code change without actually making the code change in your code base. So let's see how we can do that. So for making temporary changes which will not be persisted when the browser window is refreshed, there is the option to edit. So here in our sample, since we are making use of the source map, even if we edit some value here, let's try something. Like here, currently we have given like, in case the number is less than 0, then only the error will be thrown. So now let's add 0 as well. So once we make the change and test it out, you can see that there is no exception that is happening within the console. You can see that within the console, no error has been thrown. This is because actually we modified the source map generated file and not the actual code. So in order to get the actual code, you can do one thing. You can copy the current function name and just search using the Ctrl+Shift+F. And once you do that, you get the actual file, that is the main.js, where the code is there. So let's make the change here. And now when we press on the find factorial, you can see that the error is thrown in the console. The problem with this approach is that once we refresh our application, if we go to the main.js where we made the change is gone. So is there any way in which we can persist these changes? So there are two options in which you can persist your changes temporarily in your local folders. In the left navigation pane, there is an option called overrides and another option called the file system. These two options can be used for different scenarios. So in our current scenario, what is happening is we are running our application using the ng-serve. So it is basically run from the memory. It does not write into any particular location in the file system. So in this scenario, we can make use of the override option or the local override. So in this option, what we need to do is that you can click on this select folder for overrides and select any particular newly created folder. So here I am using the local folder. So once you select that, it will ask for the access. So I am giving it as allow. So once you do that, the folder will be shown within this workspace. So once you have done that, what you can do is you can just right click on this JS file which you need to override and select the option save for overrides. So once you click on that, you can see that there's an entry here, main.js, and you can use them open in containing folder. So here you can see that the code is here and you can directly make the change here. So in this scenario, I am going to add the less than or equal to, and now even when we refresh, what happens is that the code is persisted here, and there will be a symbol here within the network tab which is showing that it is taking the value from the overridden JS file and not the actual JS from the network tab. So let's try running our application. When we click on the find factorial, you can see that the error is thrown. So the local override will be useful particularly in case you do not have the source code for this particular website. So in this can be scenarios in which you run it in a dev server mode, or in case you open any other third-party website for which you will not have the code, but you want to try out something within that website without actually modifying the code. Similarly, we have the file system. So the file system option can be used while we have the actual code residing within our local machine. For trying out the file system option, what I have done is I have built our Angular application so that the files are actually generated in the local machine, and I am serving it using the HTTP server on port 4200. So once we do that, you can see that our application is up and running. We can do one thing. We will remove the overrides so that our code is not taken from the override. So here you can remove the folder as well. So I am removing it from the overrides. So now what we can do is we can add this particular folder, that is the dist folder, to our workspace. So here what I am going to do is click on the add folder to workspace, and we go to within our application and select the folder, that is application folder within our dist folder. So I have selected that and click on it. It will ask for permission. Allow it. Now you can see that all these files which have the green dot as the indicator, these files we can directly override. So now we can click on the main.js. So since we have run the application in production mode, our files will be, it will not be quite readable. So in order to make it more readable, what we can do is we have this particular option that is called format. Just click on it. It will show the file in a more human readable way, and here we can search for our factorial code, and once we get that, we can just make our modification and save it. Now even when we refresh our application, the change will be still here, and when I click on the factorial, you can see that the error is thrown. So through this way we will be able to modify even the index.html. So here I am going to maybe add a text here within the body as hello and save it. When you refresh, you can see that the text is being shown here. So this file system option is quite useful for making the changes without actually modifying the code. Finally, let's take a look at one more option which is available within the left navigation, that is the snippets. So snippets are basically code which can be run, like which can be saved locally, and in case you need to run a utility, you will be able to make use of the snippets. So suppose I want to access the Lodash global variable underscore within the console without actually installing or using Lodash within my application. When I try to access the global underscore variable, you can see that underscore is not defined. So for this purpose, what we can do is we can click on the new snippet, and we can just add a snippet called add Lodash, and here we can add any code. Like here what I am doing is I am basically adding a script tag and downloading the Lodash and appending it to the head. So once we save this code, you will be able to right click on this and run, or another option is you can use the Ctrl Shift P, that is to run a command, and you can give the exclamation mark and add low dash. Either option you can use. So here I will be using this. Now what happened is that our snippet has been executed, and now when I try to get the value for underscore, you can see that the low dash has been loaded and the global variable underscore is available. So for executing this kind of useful code, the snippets can be added. So hope you are able to get a good idea about how to make use of the Chrome DevTools sources tab for debugging and also for testing our application without actually modifying the code. See you soon. Thank you.